Morning sunlight streamed through the large glass window, casting long rays across the dining table where silver cutlery gleamed. Vivian Carter's kitchen always felt like something out of a luxury interior magazine, everything arranged too perfectly to be entirely real. Natalie Bennett sat down, her gaze quietly scanning the room. A sharp-minded creative director, known for her precision and calm, Natalie had learned to trust the instincts that made her both a brilliant strategist and a survivor. Beneath that composed exterior, however, lay a history of quiet endurance, a childhood marked by abandonment, a young career built in rooms where women like her were expected to stay silent, and a marriage that slowly taught her the cost of misplaced trust. She still remembered the night she stood outside her first job interview, heels blistering and resume clutched with trembling fingers. The HR director had looked past her, choosing the intern with the louder voice. But Natalie stayed, listened, learned, rose. Her silence had once been seen as a weakness until it became her sharpest weapon. And yet, even then, she hadn't seen Ryan coming. He hadn't needed to shout to control. His strength was suggestion, patience, masks. It took her years to realize the difference between love and conditioning. A sharp-minded creative director known for her precision and calm, Natalie had learned to trust the instincts that made her both a brilliant strategist and a survivor. Beneath that composed exterior, however, lay a history of quiet endurance, a childhood marked by abandonment, a young career built in rooms where women like her were expected to stay silent, and a marriage that slowly taught her the cost of misplaced trust. A sharp-minded creative director known for her precision and calm, Natalie had learned to trust the instincts that made her both a brilliant strategist and a survivor. On the table, delicate pastries, sliced fruits, and a steaming cup of coffee created a scene straight out of a family brunch. But underneath that polished surface, something else lingered. Natalie could feel it. This time, it wasn't just her professional instinct. It was survival. Ryan, her husband, placed the coffee cup in front of her with a polite smile. "I know you like it dark and aromatic. I made it just the way you like." Vivian, sitting across from her, speared a strawberry with a dainty fork and smiled. Ryan brewed it himself. "A little more special today." Natalie narrowed her eyes slightly. She raised the cup to her nose, inhaling. Something was off. The familiar scent of Arabica was laced with a faint, almost imperceptible trace of metal. Not a flavor, not from the sugar or milk. It was something else, something intentional. In that moment, a flood of memories surged. Bouts of nausea, unexplained headaches after meals at Vivian's house, 2 hospital visits for mild food poisoning with no clear diagnosis. And the strange pattern, always before a major meeting. She set the cup down and smiled coolly. "Excuse me. I need to take a quick call from work." No one questioned it. Natalie left the table, stepping into the living room. She didn't make a call. Instead, she quietly looped around the back hallway to the kitchen, watching silently from behind Ryan and Vivian. Her cup was untouched. Vivian's had just been topped up. In a swift, practiced move, Natalie swapped the cups. 5 minutes passed. Vivian began to frown. Her hand trembled subtly, like a minor spasm. Her eyes lost focus. Ryan glanced over. "You okay? You look pale." Vivian set down her fork, clutching her chest. I feel dizzy." Her eyes widened, then she started coughing violently, folding forward over the table. Ryan leapt up, panicked. "Vivian, what's wrong?" Natalie emerged, phone in hand, recording. "I believe she just drank my coffee. The one you brewed for me, right, Ryan?" The room froze. Ryan stared at Natalie, his usual charm replaced by dread. He didn't answer. Natalie stepped forward, checking Vivian's pulse. Still alive, but weak. Calmly, she called emergency services, gave the address, and hung up. Turning to Ryan, her voice was razor-sharp. "Do you understand what you've done? Or are you going to say I made it up again?" Ryan stammered. I didn't think I'd catch you this time." Natalie cut him off. "I've been recording since you placed that cup. I've got the hospital files. And more importantly, I have instincts sharpened by loving someone who turned those instincts against me." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Natalie stood upright, looking down at the woman writhing on the floor, then back at her husband. "Good luck explaining why the poisoned coffee was mine." And she drank it. Ryan said nothing. His hands shook. Gone was the confident man she once married, replaced by a maskless coward. Natalie turned and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. The sun still streamed through the window, but inside her, a new chapter had just begun, one that no longer smelled of metal, but of truth, finally unveiled. The sound of ambulance sirens grew louder, interspersed with the rushed footsteps of medics storming into the house. Natalie stepped back to let them reach Vivian, now curled on the kitchen floor, her face pale, her breathing erratic. A nurse injected a stabilizer while another checked her pulse and began administering fluids. Ryan was pulled aside. A police officer accompanying the paramedics placed a firm hand on his shoulder, eyes sharp. "Are you a relative?" I'm her brother," Ryan replied hoarsely. "What's wrong with her?" Natalie stepped in, her voice like a blade. "Maybe he should tell you what was in that cup of coffee. Because if I'm right, he and his sister prepared it together." Ryan opened his mouth, but the officer's cold gaze silenced him. "We'll take that into record. Both of you will need to come to the station once the patient stabilizes." On the stretcher, Vivian groaned, her eyes cracked open, sclera more white than iris. The once composed, elegant woman was reduced to a twitching, helpless shell. "Water, Ryan, what did you do?" Vivian rasped. "It wasn't me. You drank the wrong cup." Ryan whispered harshly, casting furtive glances at Natalie. But in her ears, every word thudded like a fist against the wall of truth. Vivian flailed weakly. Natalie leaned down. "What are you trying to say, Vivian? Say it clearly. The police are here, and so is the recorder." Vivian clutched Natalie's wrist, her nails barely scraping the skin. "It wasn't supposed to kill, just to make you miss the meeting, like before. But you always got better. Always." Natalie froze. "You said like before?" Vivian nodded slowly. "Ryan's idea? That was enough." A medic intervened. "Please step back. We need to transport the patient now." Vivian was lifted onto the gurney and wheeled out. Natalie watched, her heart pounding, not from hate but from the weight of living years beside a family she thought was hers. Ryan tried to follow, but an officer stopped him. "Where do you think you're going? We need your statement at the precinct." He turned to Natalie, eyes rimmed red. "You don't understand. I never meant to hurt you. You were just too successful. Everyone only talked about you. I couldn't take it." Natalie didn't cry. She had no tears left. Her voice was low, firm. "It wasn't my success that broke you. It was your weakness." The officer led Ryan away. Natalie stood in the hallway, framed by sunlight cutting through the window. She exhaled, a long, steady breath. For the first time in years, she felt no doubt about herself. The truth, finally, had spoken. 2 days after the incident, Natalie's apartment felt larger than usual. No more forced breakfast banter, no fake check-in messages from Ryan, no tense dinners masked as routine. Only silence. But it was the kind of quiet she had long yearned for, a space to breathe and to prepare for what came next, the legal battle and the reclamation of her truth. She opened her laptop and accessed a hidden archive. Her personal medical records from the past 3 years, emergency room visits labeled mild poisoning, unexplained fatigue, persistent nausea. All following meals or drinks prepared by Ryan or Vivian. Each file time-stamped, lab results attached. What once felt like coincidence now revealed a chilling consistency. She printed them out, sorted them chronologically, and cross-referenced each with key corporate milestones, client presentations, leadership pitches, major product launches. Every time she needed to be at her best, something inside her was quietly unraveling. With the documents neatly stacked, Natalie called her private attorney, Allison Park, a former law school friend and one of the city's top criminal lawyers. The call was brief but heavy. "We need to build this not just as an isolated act, but as a pattern," Allison said. "It's premeditated psychological harm, a long-term campaign to control, diminish, and destabilize you." "I've recorded a partial confession from Vivian," Natalie replied. "And I have texts from Ryan. After one of my hospital stays, he messaged, 'Maybe it's the universe telling you to slow down. You push yourself too hard.'" Her voice cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. "Perfect. Don't delete anything, even the trivial stuff. We'll have a forensic analyst extract and authenticate everything." That afternoon, Natalie visited the police station to supplement her statement. The lead detective, Raymond Ortega, a seasoned officer specializing in covert domestic abuse cases, read through each page with quiet concentration. "Did Ryan ever express resentment toward your professional life?" he asked. Natalie flipped to a credit card statement. 2 months prior, Ryan had purchased a restricted neurochemical agent, one not available without a prescription. He didn't need to say it. He left paper trails. Raymond nodded, jotting notes. This strengthens the criminal case. We'll need Vivian's full testimony, but your data is already compelling. On her way home, Natalie paused at a small cafe where she and Ryan had once shared their first coffee date. The decor hadn't changed. Warm lights, wooden tables, the scent of pastries in the air. But she had changed. The woman sitting by the window now carried the weight and the strength of someone who had stopped second-guessing herself. She pulled out a notebook and wrote, "They didn't just steal my time, they tried to steal my clarity, but I'm taking every piece back." And in that moment, Natalie knew this was more than just a court case. It was her reckoning, her restoration, her refusal to be erased by silence ever again. The courtroom was colder than Natalie expected. Marble floors, heavy drapes, rows of silent faces, each waiting for a voice to rise above the quiet. This was not the main trial yet, but a pre-trial hearing to establish the gravity of the charges and present the evidence formally. It felt like a threshold. Once crossed, there would be no turning back. Allison stood tall beside her, presenting each document with precision: medical records, surveillance footage, Ryan's handwritten notes. The room held its breath when the recording of Vivian's trembling confession was played. Natalie didn't flinch. She met Ryan's gaze for a moment. He looked smaller than she remembered, as if the weight of exposure had begun to crush the facade he'd spent years maintaining. When Vivian appeared via video link from the hospital, her voice was hoarse but clear. "Yes, I knew what Ryan gave me. I went along with it. I thought it was harmless, just something to keep Natalie out of work, not to hurt her. I see now how wrong that was." Natalie exhaled slowly, not out of forgiveness, but out of recognition. This was what accountability looked like: imperfect, late, but real. The judge reviewed the evidence, nodded, and confirmed what everyone in the room already knew: the case would proceed to full criminal trial. Ryan was remanded into custody. That night, Natalie returned home to a quiet apartment that no longer felt like a holding cell. It was still, and that stillness belonged to her. Days passed in a blur of meetings, media inquiries, and preparation. Natalie's name was now tied to a cause bigger than her own pain. She hadn't asked for that. But she didn't shrink from it either. She was invited to speak at a private forum for executives, mostly women, on the subtleties of psychological abuse in high-functioning relationships. She had always hated public speaking, but when she stood in front of the room, her voice steady, her story told with raw clarity, the silence that followed was unlike anything she'd heard before. It wasn't awkwardness. It was resonance. After the event, a woman in her 60s approached her with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I left him today. Because of you." Natalie nodded and said nothing. Some truths were too big for language. One evening, as she was organizing the evidence with Allison, a note was slid under her apartment door. No return address, just one line in smudged ink. "Some people don't want this trial to happen. Stay silent or pay the price." Natalie stared at the note for a long time. Then she placed it gently into an evidence bag. If they thought fear would undo her, they had misread her completely. Allison insisted on security. A retired FBI consultant was brought in to advise. Cameras installed, access limited. But Natalie knew that the real threat had never been strangers. It had always come from within her circle. The following morning, she visited an old apartment she and Ryan had once shared, Unit 18A, long since abandoned, still under his name. It had always been off-limits. Ryan called it just a storage unit. But Natalie's instincts said otherwise. She brought tools with her this time. The place smelled like dust and stale memories. Everything was untouched, except for one door at the back, the one that had always been locked. She picked it open. Inside was a small, windowless room. Covered walls, photos of her, printouts of press articles with her face circled, diagrams, a twisted kind of timeline, tracking her routines, achievements, and weaknesses. It wasn't just obsession. It was methodical deconstruction. There were lists, targets, goals, mentions of her medical history, her cycle, what times of the month she was more vulnerable. Natalie stared at the horror curated in that room. It wasn't madness. It was science. It was warfare. On the desk, a leather-bound notebook. In Ryan's handwriting, Her biggest strength is that no one would believe she's vulnerable. Use that. Don't overplay, just wear her down. She stood in that room for a long time. Then she gathered everything, the notebook, the photos, the lies. On the way out, she called Allison. I found the epicenter, Natalie said. Everything we suspected, it's worse, and it's all documented. There was silence on the line. Then Allison's voice. This isn't just a domestic abuse case anymore. This is premeditated psychological warfare. We'll escalate. Natalie stepped out into the morning. The sky was pale, but her steps felt steady. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't waiting to be believed. She was walking into the truth. Later that night, she received a phone call from an investigative reporter with a major national outlet. They'd caught wind of the pretrial and wanted a comment. Natalie hesitated. This isn't about me, she finally said. It's about a pattern. One that hides behind charm, ambition, and intimacy. One that silences people like me every day. The next day, the article ran. Her face on the front page, not as a victim, but as a whistleblower. It was uncomfortable, vulnerable, but it was right. That weekend, she received a call from Vivian. Her voice was less tremulous than before. I'm ready to testify in full, Vivian said. No more deflection, no more excuses. Natalie nodded into the silence. Then let's tell it all. Every detail, and never look away again. As the full trial loomed, Natalie no longer counted days with dread. She counted them as steps, not toward survival, but toward reclamation. The courtroom was full. Not with noise, but with presence. Rows of journalists, a sea of attentive faces. Natalie could feel the weight of every eye, every breath, every heartbeat waiting to witness not just a verdict, but a reckoning. That morning, Natalie had stood before the mirror longer than usual. She wore black, not for mourning, but for clarity, for precision. Her hair pulled back, her voice rehearsed not as a performance, but as defense. Truth, she knew now, wasn't always enough. It had to be sharp, articulated, unshakable. As she walked through the courthouse doors, camera flashes erupted. She didn't look left or right. Allison's voice was steady beside her. We're ready. Inside, Ryan sat between his lawyers, hair shorter, suit ill-fitted, his expression unreadable. But Natalie knew that face. It was the same one that once leaned into her laugh, whispered dreams at midnight. Now it sat behind a barricade of denial. The prosecution opened with clarity and control. Thomas Linwood had become something of a bulldog in the press, and now in court, he outlined the structure of psychological sabotage with surgical detail. Exhibit A, the medical reports. Exhibit B, the voice recordings. Exhibit C, the surveillance footage from apartment 18A. Each item landed like a stone in still water. Vivian took the stand on the second day. Her voice quivered at first. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought he was just managing Natalie's stress. But it was more. He knew what he was doing. And I helped him. Cross-examination was brutal. Ryan's defense attorney painted her as complicit and unstable, but Vivian held. I lied before. I was manipulated. I'm telling the truth now because someone needs to stop him. That afternoon, Natalie walked the hallway alone. A woman in a navy suit stopped her, soft voice, trembling fingers. I read about you. I brought my daughter today so she could see what strength looks like. Natalie smiled, touched her hand briefly, then kept walking. On the fourth day, Natalie was called. She took the stand with a quiet stillness. Not stiff, not dramatic, just present. She swore the oath, sat, and met the gaze of every juror, one by one. Tell us, the prosecutor said, what it was like living with Ryan Carter. She began slowly. It wasn't one moment, it was hundreds. It was the slow erosion of who I thought I was. He never yelled, he never hit. But every time I doubted myself, he made it easier to believe I was the problem. The room hung on every word. I wasn't sick, she said. I was poisoned. I wasn't forgetful. I was drugged. And every time I rose, he found a quieter way to bring me down. She described the symptoms, the fog, the gaslighting, the self-doubt. He used my strength against me. And when that didn't work, he used science, data, drugs. The defense tried to rattle her, suggested she was exaggerating, that she wanted the spotlight. I wanted peace, she replied. I wanted my life back. I didn't want a stage. I wanted safety. When she stepped down from the stand, the room didn't move. There was no applause, no drama, just silence. The kind that meant something had landed deep. Closing arguments began on a Monday morning heavy with rain. Outside, umbrellas bloomed like flowers. Inside, the courtroom pulsed. Ryan's defense framed him as troubled, misunderstood. Was he manipulative? Perhaps. But a criminal? Intentional harm? The prosecution wants you to see a monster. We see a man who lost control of a complex relationship. Then Linwood rose. He didn't lose control, he built control. He didn't react, he planned. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment, it was a system. It was science turned cruel. Look at the patterns, the notebooks, the mirrored dates between her collapses and his documented satisfaction. The jury retired for deliberation. Hours passed, then a full day. Natalie waited in a private room, no phone, no news. Just her, a cup of cold tea, and the quiet tapping of her foot against linoleum. When the call came, her hands went cold. They filed in, 12 faces, none looking at her directly. The foreman handed the paper to the judge. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. In the matter of Ryan Carter, on the charges of felony poisoning, criminal endangerment, and psychological abuse, how do you find the defendant? Guilty, on all counts. No sound, not at first. Then Ryan's lawyer let out a breath. Ryan said nothing. The judge banged the gavel, sentencing to follow. But Natalie already knew. It was over. Not because the court said so. Because she had finally been heard. The sentencing hearing was quieter, more restrained. But Natalie felt the pressure more keenly than ever. Now came the part where justice wasn't just acknowledged. It had to be defined. The courtroom was smaller this time. Fewer seats, less media. Just the judge, the attorneys, the jury, and those who had lived this nightmare alongside her. Ryan stood when called. The judge, a solemn man with tired eyes and a voice like gravel, looked at him for a long time before speaking. Mr. Carter, he began, you have been found guilty of premeditated psychological abuse, criminal endangerment, and felony poisoning. This court has reviewed the evidence with rigor and heard the voices of those you tried to silence. A pause. Then, what you inflicted was not visible to the eye, but it was felt. In the erosion of identity, in the deliberate dismantling of trust, in the slow suffocation of autonomy. You built a prison from routine, from science, from manipulation, and you called it love. Natalie didn't blink. She didn't breathe. Therefore, the judge continued, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole for 15 years. You are ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and rehabilitation. Furthermore, you are barred from contacting Ms. Bennett or any affiliated witness for the rest of your life. There was a moment of stillness. Ryan stood motionless. Then his shoulders dropped, not in shame but in resignation. He had lost. Outside, the press waited, microphones raised, cameras poised. But Natalie didn't step toward them. She stood in the lobby for a long moment, watching sunlight stream through the high windows. Allison came to stand beside her. It's done, Natalie nodded. Not quite, but it's a beginning. She stepped outside, the hum of city life folding around her like an old song. She didn't address the crowd. She didn't need to. She had said everything that mattered in a courtroom. Where it counted, where it echoed. And now, for the first time in years, she walked forward, not as a woman escaping something. 1 year later, Natalie lives in a restored brownstone in the city's quiet northern edge, where the streets are lined with trees that bloom without apology. Her days are slower now, intentional. She wakes up before dawn, drinks her coffee while watching the sun creep across the hardwood floor, and opens her laptop to begin her new work. She no longer leads campaigns or presents to boardrooms. Instead, she leads voices of integrity, courage, and empathy. A nonprofit she founded to survivors of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. It started with 3 women in a church basement. Now it spans 30 cities. Natalie rarely tells her full story anymore. She doesn't have to. Her presence does the telling. Her resilience, her clarity, her ability to hold space for others without rescuing them. These are the things that speak now. Vivian volunteers at Voice, quietly, consistently. She doesn't ask for redemption. She earns trust in hours spent listening, helping, showing up. Forgiveness, Natalie knows, isn't a gift, it's a horizon. Some days closer, some days further, but always in sight. Allison remains her closest ally. Every week they meet at a corner cafe, trading legal updates and weekend recipes. They speak less of the trial now and more of possibility, of what's next for the women still afraid to leave, for the ones still doubting their pain. Sometimes Natalie receives letters. One read: because you stood up, I walked out. Because you spoke, I found my words. Because you stayed visible, I stopped hiding. She keeps these folded in a small wooden box. Not as trophies, but as reminders. That truth echoes, that silence can be broken, that voices once lost can be found again. And in the early hours when the city is still half asleep, Natalie stands by her window with a cup of tea in hand, watching the skies shift from indigo to gold. No flashbacks, no footsteps behind her. Just light, and the life she chose, unafraid.